schools right now in New York City, we have no way of knowing, is it too early to shut them down? But when we say too early, right, what are we talking about? We're talking about, like, are they going to lose a couple of weeks worth of school that they didn't have to? Because there seems to be inevitability that we're going to have to shut down the schools in New York City. The problem is that depending on whose numbers you believe, I've seen reports up to, the New York Times had a piece recently saying that over 100,000 kids, remember New York City public schools, I think is like 1.5 million kids. Over 100,000 of those kids are homeless. And even more of the students in this city, I don't know if it's 500,000, rely on the schools for lunch and breakfast. And presumably their parents are the last people who are allowed to take time off or not work at work, right? People in the service industries. And so these are the people who are most susceptible to getting the virus. They are the people who have least amount of means to deal with their children if there's no school. So we have a situation where the fact that we have this type of poverty, that this type of nutrition deprivation, as it were, is going to keep us from protecting all of society from this illness. And it's going to have cascading effects. Like, this is the moment you can see it, right? This is the canary in the coal mine scenario. You bring the canary in the coal mine because they have the smallest lungs. And if there's a problem in there, you're going to see it very quickly. When we have an incident like this, when we have a phenomenon like this, you quite clearly see who are the most vulnerable in our society. And the fact of the matter is that, you know, that hackneyed slogan, we are as strong as our weakest link, is true. And sometimes it takes an event like this to make it very, very explicit. Because we have this kind of poverty in this city, we can't close the schools without creating maybe even bigger problems. But by not closing the schools, even though kids are not affected, they're carriers, it could very well end up making people across, you know, all elements of society ill. But yet, it is still easier if you are wealthy in this society to deal with this. You can afford to pay for babysitting if you need to go to work. You can afford to get out of the city and go into a less dense area. You can afford, they've jacked up the prices on toilet paper. Okay. I mean, this is an opportunity at the very least to discuss those things. It's also an opportunity to sort of point out the importance of something like Medicaid, why you wouldn't block grant it. In other situations like this, where the economy is hit hard, and the economy is going to get hit hard here, folks, or where there's a natural disaster, Medicaid, because it is not block granted, because there is not a fixed amount that each state gets, but rather a formula where the federal government can sign off if a state says, hey, you know, for whatever reason, we have an expansion of need. And this is how we can show it mathematically. And then the federal government signs off for it. We have a federal government that's looking to cut Medicaid by block granting it. And so if they acknowledge that the system works best this way and can provide for as many people who need it this way, at least to some extent, right? I mean, some states have limited it. Then it undercuts their argument to block grant it. And so they're going to deny. So that's where we're at now. The debate as of now is going to go on. We'll talk more about it with Ryan Grimm. just a style note, part of the style guide. We've obviously been talking about the C word quite a bit because that's implicating everything right now in our politics and in our news. And I don't get, look, this is, and on YouTube, their algorithm is such that they look at this stuff and because they don't want to hire human beings to decide whether something might be, inappropriate for advertisers, they just pick keywords or we're not really sure what it is that they do. We don't know if they look at the transcripts or they do titling or whatever, the descriptions.
The chat.
It could be the chat. And they decide not good for advertisers. So like we're running at an incredibly high rate now with our videos where they are not being monetized. I get it to some degree. But again, a part of the problem is just like Google's business model is such that they would rather not have to pay real people to look at this and make a real assessment. I think there's a broader problem, frankly, in terms of like what it means for our news going, forward. Because a lot of people get their news from YouTube now. And if you're telling creators like, you better not talk about the C word, because if you talk about the C word, we're going to demonetize you. Now, fortunately here, we have members who support the show, and we have advertisements that come from other places. And so we have multiple revenue streams. So we're not, that dependent on YouTube. And I try not to like get out ahead of our skis here and grow too quickly. I'd like to, but I just don't want to, we have the AM Quickie and we're, financing that out of the Majority Report. So it's not that big of a disaster, but we're gonna use the C word instead of the other word for this event that is affecting the United States right now and the world. So we're gonna just avoid using that word, and I hope you understand what that is and whatnot. I mean, if we end up getting demonetized anyways, then we'll probably revert and just suck it up for a while. But I'm not going to stop talking about it because
it'd be difficult to find content for the show these days.
It would be difficult to find content, but also it's sort of like, I'm not going to let the algorithm of YouTube and how many clicks we get, never mind clicks. I mean, how much money we can make from it dictate what our programming is. And right, we've changed the company policy, so we're not going to do that anymore. But we expect, look, and we're going to take some phone calls. We didn't get a second guest today because I want to hear from people around the country as to like, what's happening in their communities, about this, because, I've talked to some people who are just like, yeah, what's up? I'm like, what do you mean what's up? You know what's up? And they're like, what do you mean what's up? Like, there's no toilet paper in New York City. There's, secret stash at Target. And, and they're just like, what are you talking about? I'm curious what's going around. Now, obviously we live in one of the densest part of the country, if not the most dense part of the country. And so there's people are at a higher concern as they're coughing in the background. And
it's a tense situation.
It's a tense situation. And I anticipate, I'm setting up situations where remote stuff. I've got family in Massachusetts who need to be cared for and are in the, the most vulnerable category. So, I'm prepared I've got a couple of contingencies, one which involves like a satellite studio, one which involves just sort of like a mobile studio. We're going to continue on no matter what. We are officially going down to a necessary personnel only program, which we had instituted some years ago, the necessary person protocol at the Majority Report. A lot of people are going to be, I think, working at home and hanging out at home. Kids are going to be at home. we're going to try and, I don't know, we'll try and get creative in terms of what we can provide for people in terms of content. We'll obviously continue to do what we're doing. We're going to have to, we'll see. Next week, we intend to more or less be doing as we do, but at one point it's just going to be harder to, some elements of the show are going to suffer a little bit, I think. But also,